Bruce James Saunders was born in regional Queensland in 1964. I couldn't really find anything about his early life. Sadly, the only details I could find about him were about his death. He was a lovely man by all accounts. He had a huge smile, he loved fiercely, had a gentle nature and a bit of a bleeding heart. He was generous to a fault and wore his heart on his sleeve, longing deeply for connection throughout his whole life. He was married quite young and had 2 sons, but he lost his wife to breast cancer. Seeking connection again, he got married a second time, but unfortunately that didn't last long and they divorced quite shortly after. He was a very loyal, loving and generous person. By 2015, he wanted to find another connection and he tried online dating. He found that he had plenty of options, nice for some, but there was one woman in particular who really stood out to Bruce. Her name was Sharon Graham, but she was known by her friends as Muffy. I could not find out why, but I quite liked that, Muffy. She was a little bit of a hippie, she was unemployed and a bit of a free spirit, and Bruce fell hard. She moved to Toowoomba, which is like the most Aussie place name I've ever heard. I love that so much. And Bruce followed her there when she moved to Toowoomba. They lived there for a little while before she decided she wanted to go to the Sunshine Coast and finally decided to settle in Nambour, which is kind of just inland from the Sunshine Coast. Bruce followed her again and bought a home for them both to live in. But things didn't go all that well once they got there. They were very on again, off again, quite often. Their friends described their relationship as one that would cause them major whiplash. So in 2017, so got together in 2015. In 2017, Sharon moved out of the home. She didn't say she was breaking off for good, but it was one of those on again, off again, and she said, I'm moving out this time. Bruce was in complete denial. He didn't want the relationship to end because he was smitten. He was convinced she was his future and wanted to make that clear to her. So he bought her an engagement ring. Sharon loved the constant attention. So she did, and these are my words from what I've read about her, string him along. She was dangling the idea that they would get back together, even though she probably wasn't really looking like she was making that much of a commitment to him. She did move back into their shared home, but she set herself up in the spare bedroom, which is just like, I don't know, I feel that's that's almost a bit like dangling the carrot even more. If you're moving back in, move back in properly, you know? So she was giving him enough false hope to keep him around, but she just didn't seem to have any intention of being monogamous and kept dating other men. One of those men was named Gregory Rosa. He lived in a caravan park in a place called, and I am not making this up, Deception Bay. It was about 70 kilometres away from Nambour where she lived with Bruce. So Sharon tried to hide this relationship from Bruce, but she wasn't very good at it. She would actually bring him to Nambour to hang out with Bruce and her. She introduced him to Bruce as Roger, which is bizarre. Like, you can pretend not to be with someone but still use their real name. But this is how much of a, she was just trying to kind of get away with whatever she could. So the 3 of them would all hang out together. Poor Bruce none the wiser, or at least not letting himself accept that he probably knew there was something more going on. He probably knew but didn't admit that Roger/Gregory and Sharon were stupid. Bruce over time would kind of say to Sharon, are you seeing other people? I feel like you're always out of the house. But he never actually specifically called out Roger/Gregory. He didn't want to bring it up with her because he loved her, and I think he probably knew what was going on, and if he'd brought that up, she might have said yes and left for good. So in a bid to show her just how serious he was about spending the rest of his life with her, apparently an engagement ring wasn't enough, he changed his will. Always a good idea. And he named Sharon as the sole beneficiary to his life insurance, which was around $750,000. He was also funding Sharon's lifestyle because she refused to get a job. He would spend literally all his money as it was swiftly running out because he was spending it all then on two people. He even began stealing food from the butcher's shop where he worked, which, I don't know, I feel like stolen meat would not be the best meat to have. I don't know why I think that, like I'm thinking he's like hiding it down his pants and it's like going warm before he brings it home. But anyway, but not only did Sharon not care about where Bruce's money came from or where this dodgy stolen meat came from, it seems she didn't actually really know or fully comprehend that he had any financial troubles at all. He really, really hid it from her. Bruce wanted to be Prince Charming, so he kept his money woes to himself and just continued to provide for her. She was going around town flaunting how rich her boyfriend was and how he did everything for her as well. But it didn't make her treat him any better. She was emotionally abusive and just kept stringing him along while always having someone else in the wings. Gregory Rosa, the not-so-secret lover that we've already heard about, was the opposite of Bruce. He was unstable financially and emotionally. He was hot-headed and cruel. He worked as a truck driver and he lived in a caravan in the famously named Deception Bay. And after a while, Sharon made her decision. She wanted to be with Gregory, not Bruce. But with what we know about Sharon so far, Sammy, do we think that was the end of the happily ever after? Nah. Here enters Peter Koenig. Also a truck driver, he had met Sharon years before when they were both living and working in South Australia. So for our overseas listeners, a different state entirely. They met because, here we go, you're keeping up. They met because Sharon was at that time in South Australia dating Peter Koenig's boss named Barry Collins. He will come back later, so remember that name. Barry Gibb, Phil Collins. Barry Collins. Peter Koenig became infatuated with Sharon and she kept him close. This seems to be her MO. So close that he actually ended up moving to Queensland with her and and Barry Collins, when they moved there. So they weren't in a relationship. She was in a relationship with his boss, Barry, but when they were moving, Peter was like, well, I don't want to be away from her. So literally upped and moved as well. Their friends described them as having a, quote, tortured friendship that involved sex, sharing naked photos, and toxic attachment. Sharon never committed to being with Peter, but again, he was absolutely smitten with her and just allowed her to keep him on a tight leash for years. He literally followed her around like a puppy. So here we are back in 2017 again. Sharon found herself involved in some way with three men. We've got Bruce Saunders, the lovely one who's providing for her, Gregory Rosa, deception man in Deception Bay, and Peter Koenig, the tortured, toxic friend. All three men vowed to do anything and everything it would take to be her one and only, and Sharon knew it. She'd talk about it openly, constantly discussing how stupid Bruce was to the other two men. It seemed that Greg was the one she really wanted to be with, but Bruce, so she thought, was the one with the money, so she kept him around. She bragged about the fact that he'd bought her a home once and was promising to buy her another if it meant she would come back to him. She bragged and laughed about it with Greg, saying, how good would that be? I could take it all, then divorce him and get everything. It's not my fault he loves me and wants to give me everything. Like, you know, if we didn't know this story was going in a bad place, that's kind of like, well, maybe no, I take that back. Each of the three men were convinced he was the one Sharon wanted. She was cold, calculated, and manipulative. She had no plans to end any of these three relationships because life as it was in 2017 for her meant she had financial and sexual freedom without any official ties to any of the three men. And to be honest, that does sound kind of nice actually. She wanted her cake, but to eat it too. But how? Bruce was being kind of annoying, like always offering her lifelong love and support. She didn't want that, but she did want his money. How could she manage that? she started thinking about ways she could remove him from her love quadrangle situation. Could she get married, live with him long enough to make the courts believe it was legit, then divorce him and take it all? Too long and too romantic. Could she fake an illness, get him to cash out his super and give it all to her, then up and leave? Too risky. She had to find the elusive Goldilocks plan, the one that was just right. In November 2017, she once again played the three men off against each other for her gain. But this time it wasn't in a sexual manipulative plan or exploit. She simply got the three men to work together to help out a friend who, very confusingly and annoyingly, is also named Sharon. Her name's Sharon Byton. This friend, Sharon Byton, needed trees cleared from her property. Her husband had recently died and she was putting their property on the market to sell. So she wanted to clean it up and make it look nice for sale. And Sharon Graham kindly offered up her lovely friends, Bruce, Greg and Peter, to do the heavy lifting. Sharon Byton didn't know her friend was romantically involved with Greg or Peter. She knew her to be in a relationship with Bruce. Of course, when Sharon asked Bruce if he could help, he jumped at the opportunity to show he would do anything she asked. On November 12, the men arrived at the property in Goomboorian, which is maybe the second most Australian place name, which is near Gympie, northwest of the Sunshine Coast. That day on the property clearing the trees was just like the 2 days they had done each of the 2 weekends before. So they were doing it on their weekends when they weren't working, and this was the 3rd time they had gone to do it. The men had hired a truck, tools, chainsaws, and an industrial wood chipper. There was like a really big property with lots of trees, so they needed this proper wood chipper to actually be able to get through everything. Bruce had organised the wood chipper himself through connections he had, and he paid for it himself. He would do anything for Sharon to help, and the other two were famously cash strapped. He realised it would make life a lot easier, make the work a lot easier and faster to have this big machine, so he just went, I'll do it and I'll pay for it. At the end of another hard day of labour, something horrible happened. But at the end of that 3rd day of hard labour, something terrible happened. A call was made to 000 at 8 p.m. saying someone had fallen into a wood chipper and it didn't look good. The emergency services crews that arrived would have no idea what they were about to encounter, and I'm sure they will never be able to forget it. And just a trigger warning here, this is really, really awful. The first thing the emergency services saw was human remains chewed up and spat out in an arc 15 metres from the machine. So this is what it's designed to do with trees. So it kind of, sucks in the tree and then makes it into like wood chippings and spits it out in a U shape around it to leave behind. The human remains had been spat out like discarded mulch. Then they looked up at the wood chipper itself, and it was about to get worse. What they saw was a pair of legs, quote, shredded, sticking out the end of the machine. Greg and Peter were there and were visibly upset and very shaken. They told police that Bruce had been silly all day around the wood chipper, playing practical jokes and being very careless on his phone, walking around the machine while it was on. Neither of them saw what had actually happened, but heard something that did not sound right and looked over to see that Bruce had fallen into the wood chipper while it was on. All they could do is run and turn off the machine, which they did, but it wasn't enough to save him. That's why his legs were still stuck in the blades. He'd gone in head first. It was horrific. It was a horrific, tragic accident, gruesome and completely life-altering for all of those who witnessed it, but there was nothing suspicious about it. But still, investigators had to come and, as they do with any death, prepare a report for the coroner. And the moment the big dog detectives arrived, they thought something felt and looked off. They found a lot of blood on the tray of the woodchipper machine, so where the trees get fed into it. Not spatters as you'd expect from what the machine does, but a pool of a lot of blood, as if he had bled out for a little while there. How did that get there in a pool just on the feeder tray? Then they noticed strange markings on the ground near the machine. They looked like tracks, but they weren't tyre tracks. They looked very much like something had been dragged, and the drag marks ended right at the feeder tray of the woodchipper. Now, the police didn't let on that they had noticed these odd things when they took statements from Greg and Peter, who both were very clear of what had happened and what they had seen. That Bruce had been playing funny buggers and fell into the woodchipper while it was on. It was awful, but that's what had happened. End of story. Police didn't really know what to think, but they weren't quite ready to rule it an accident. They kept tabs on the comings and goings of Greg and Peter and both Sharon's, because given it had happened on Sharon Byton's property and Sharon Graham was the connection to all of these people. Now, we discuss often, Sammy, that people can act differently, do different things when they're in stages of grief. We can say, I wouldn't have done that, but we don't know what other people might do, rah, rah, rah. And this will be one of those times, I'm certain, when you go, oh, would you do that? The day after the accident, remembering it's happened at night time, they would have been giving statements and everything all night. The next day, Sharon started looking into Bruce's will. That night, she slept in Bruce's bed with Greg. Like, that to me is next level cold. I can maybe understand if you want, company because you feel sad, but like in Bruce's bed with the man that she had been stooping, that doesn't look good. How do I know this, you might ask? Well, police had bugged Sharon's home with video and audio recording devices. Every conversation she had, every phone call she made was being recorded. What they heard in these recordings was Sharon, Greg and Peter repeatedly reminding each other of the story of what had happened. They would rehearse the story and argue with each other if details were wrong. The recordings captured them saying they had to stick to the same story. At one point, Greg even asks if they could be bugged. And in another moment, Sharon whispers, we have to go out to the car in case they're listening. They also captured Sharon admitting that she'd asked Bruce to lower his life insurance policy shortly before he died. They've written lowered the policy. I'm not very good at financial stuff. Don't tell the ATO that. But she changed the policy so that essentially if you are really sure you're not going to die soon, you can lower the policy or change the policy. But then if you do die sooner, obviously not from anything medical, it will be a bigger payout, I think. Tell me if I'm wrong. This didn't look good, that she had, not just that he had done that, but she'd convinced him to do that. Actually, sorry, I don't know if he had done it, but she was trying to get him to do it shortly before he died. But this wasn't enough to charge anyone. So police kept monitoring the house and brought all three in for questioning a number of times in the months after Bruce's death. Their plan was to try to pit the two men off against each other. They'd got the vibe that there was some love triangle, quadrangle thing going on here and thought, we can use that to get Peter and Greg to turn on each other. But they didn't. They did not crack. They both were so strong on their stories. I've watched some of the police interviews that have been released of both of them, and they are both just so cool, calm and collected and are so sure of what had happened. Police wouldn't have their smoking gun, as it were, until they finally got a warrant to search Gregory Rose's caravan. There, they found 2 handwritten notes in Greg's handwriting outlining 2 plots to kill Bruce Saunders. But neither of these plots involved a woodchipper. The notes said, the first one, 3:30 to 4 a.m. has to be there before he wakes. Alarm goes off at 4:30 a.m. Bedroom is directly through the roller door, straight down the hallway, nightlight and kitchen. End note. It was a handwritten plan of how to sneak into Bruce's house while he slept and shoot him. The note even listed dates which matched a flight Sharon had to Adelaide, allowing her to conveniently be interstate when the murder took place. It would be staged to look like a home invasion gone wrong, and there was no way anyone could suspect anything else because Sharon wasn't there. She obviously had nothing to do with it, and, you know, these home invasions happen all the time. The second note listed Bruce's work schedule, his number plate, and his daily routine. This note discussed a backup plan if the home invasion didn't work. Greg could just shoot him in the car park when he left work. Now, I'd like to know how he thought that one was so easy to get away with. But as we know, neither of these things happened. And that is because a much better opportunity came up when Sharon's friend asked if she had any strong men who could help her clear her property. The light bulb went up above Sharon's head. This was perfect. Nobody suspects foul play in a tragic accident with a dangerous machine. Prosecutors would there's a bit of a spoiler alert there, would later say that Sharon pursued this plan with gusto, which is a great word. But not just the woodchipper plan, any plan to kill him. They found that Sharon had spent 6 months actively planning Bruce's death. 7 months after the so-called tragic accident, Sharon Graham, Gregory Rosa and Peter Koenig were charged with Bruce Saunders' murder. And it was then Peter started to talk, which I think is interesting because he was the one that was not, like the other two were more involved with her. And it's kind of like Peter's always been strung along and this is when he's gone, oh, hang on. He said he was aware of a plan to kill Bruce, but he didn't agree to go along with it. He played ignorant. He said that 2 weeks before Bruce's death, he overheard Sharon berating Greg, demanding to know why Bruce hadn't been killed yet. Greg had said matter-of-factly that there'd been too many people around. Then, on November 12, this is what Peter said happened. When they were done working for the day and it started to get dark, they downed their tools and started walking back towards the house. It was then that Gregory Rosa whacked Bruce over the head with a metal pole multiple times until and while he was on the ground. Now, it's not known if he was dead at this point or just unconscious, but Peter said he certainly seemed like he was dead. Peter and Greg then dragged Bruce's body to the woodchipper and put him in head first. They had to hold his legs as they fed him into the machine. It's not something you can just chuck things into, which, you know, kind of shows it's not something you can really fall into. They need to be fed through. So they held his legs and pushed his body in with a stick. Peter wasn't part of the attack, but he did help and admit to helping drag and feed Bruce's lifeless body into the woodchipper, and he'd lied about it for months. So he's not looking great. But if he could give police and the court all the information they needed to make sure the initial killer and the Black Widow who orchestrated it all went away, they could probably talk about a deal. Peter turned prosecution witness and had his charge of murder downgraded to being an accessory to murder. He pleaded guilty to this and gave days of evidence in court during Greg and Sharon's combined murder trial. They both pleaded not guilty. Sharon says there was never any plot and she wasn't any part of Bruce's death. Greg says, okay, yes, there was a plot, but it was Peter who carried it out. Now, one thing I couldn't find, and please write in if you know this, is why the trial was so long after their arrests. So they were arrested in 2018, but the trial didn't start until late 2022. Now, I'm thinking that probably like COVID must have had something to do with that. It often takes about 2 years for something to get to trial, which would kind of take you to 2020. I don't know why it was late 2022, but it went to trial, but it was. And before the trial started, so back in 2020, Sharon from prison on remand made an application to access Bruce's estate. She was in the will after all, and she wasn't guilty, so why shouldn't I be able to access his estate? She was denied, by the way. A lot came out during the trial. It truly sounded like a work of fiction, a tale of sex, Deception Bay, money, and a messy love quadrangle. Now, I've gone through a lot of the details of the quadrangle part of it, and I'm sure you've probably made up your mind about why Sharon would have wanted to kill Bruce. She wanted his money, but she didn't want him around. I want to ask you, Sammy, what amount of money would make you consider killing someone? Well, for Sharon, that amount was $750,000. Now, that is a lot. Don't get me wrong. But is that worth a life? Is it worth your own life if you end up being found out and put behind bars? Well, Sharon just didn't think that would ever happen. She always got what she wanted, and she thought she was smarter than everyone else. She'd been able to manipulate men her whole life. Why wouldn't this work out for her as well? So obviously Peter was the main witness at the trial. He was literally a witness, like an eyewitness, and he was there and helped. He was admitted to that. But another key witness came in an interesting form. Now, do you remember the name I told you to remember earlier? Very good. Barry Collins was Peter Koenig's former boss and, just for something different, Sharon's lover. He was the one that she was with when they moved to Queensland in the first place, and Peter bizarrely moved with them. So Sharon and Barry had split years earlier, but of course, because it's Sharon and she's some magical witch woman, she was still in regular contact with Barry and kept him close as well. So close, Barry was called as a witness in the trial. He said that about 3 weeks before Bruce's death, Sharon told Barry that she'd had a terrible premonition that something bad was going to happen on the property that the men were working on. She said, quote, "There is going to be a terrible accident. They are going to be clearing a block, clearing some land, and there is going to be an accident and someone is going to get hurt." After he heard about Bruce's death, Barry obviously quizzed Sharon on this strange premonition she'd had. But she was staunch it was an accident. In fact, the pure fact that she'd had the premonition and had been so worried further proved that she had no knowledge of it, because if she'd known that was going to happen, why would she say that? No, she'd had a true premonition because she just vibed something was going to happen. However, what I will say here is under cross-examination by Sharon's lawyer, Barry did accept that he only provided this information to police after he himself was arrested for drug trafficking in 2019, a year after the arrests. And yes, he accepted that he received a reduced sentence for his cooperation. So, you do hear about this a bit sometimes. People that certainly Sharon's defense said, well, he's making this all up just so he got a reduced sentence. But, this is what was said in court. Before coming out and admitting about this premonition thing, Barry Collins had provided a character reference for Sharon to support her bail application way back when she was arrested. At the time, he told her lawyer that she was an honest and timid person. He said there was no way Sharon put this together because she's a sheep. If the crime was committed, it was not her doing. So he then very quickly turned and said, well, actually, I always thought it was her because of this strange premonition. Barry also revealed to the court in his evidence that before moving to Queensland, Sharon said that she'd found a handgun that she'd forgotten she'd owned and gave it to Peter. As a witness on the stand, Barry also revealed to the court that before they'd moved to Queensland, he had found a handgun that he had just forgotten he'd owned, and he gave it to Peter. So remember, Peter was his employee at the time, and he said he'd never seen it again. So last he knew, Peter had a gun. The court later heard that a very stressed Greg Rosa, just a few months before Bruce's death, visited another resident at the caravan park he lived in and told this resident that his girlfriend wanted him to shoot and kill his partner. He later said, and he asked this person if they had a gun. He later said, "Don't worry, I no longer need a gun. I've got one from one of my girlfriend's friends." So this is assumed to be Peter, and it's assumed to be that gun that Barry gave him. Like, this is there's so many sides to this pentagon. There's also a bit here I love that I just wanted to include because I just find it quite funny. This caravan neighbour said in his evidence, she wanted Greg to shoot her partner. I advised him not to do that, obviously, which is just so good. I advised him not to. Something else that came out in the trial that I just had to include because this is so fucked. The initial 000 call wasn't actually about Bruce being in the woodchipper. The men before calling 000 called Sharon, and apparently she was so distressed that's when they called an ambulance and said, my girlfriend's so distressed, you need to send someone here, she's having a panic attack. They said, what is she so distressed about? And they said, oh, her boyfriend's died. On October 27, 2023, again, I don't know why this is so much later. If someone knows, please explain, because I don't understand this. The trial started in 2022. It's ended at the end of 2023. Sharon and Greg were both found guilty of murder. They were both sentenced to life in prison. Outside court, Bruce's son Blake spoke to the media saying he wanted everyone to know who his dad was. He said he was a kind man who loved his family and would do anything to help anyone. Bruce's brother, Colin, said, "We got the best outcome, but at the end of the day, she's still got a life and my brother doesn't." Sharon Byton spoke to A Current Affair just last year and spoke about how much the crime has affected her. Remember, she's the one whose property it happened on, and she was friends with Sharon Graham. She was used as the scapegoat, and it was her property he'd died on. She said she felt guilty about this for years, but mostly angry. She has nothing good to say about the woman she thought was her friend, and she wishes her nothing but grief in prison. In her victim impact statement read to the court before Sharon Graham's sentencing, Sharon Byton said, "Sharon, you need to take responsibility for your decisions and stop blaming everybody else. You planned it and you made sure it was carried out. You have a way of getting men to do your bidding. It's like you have a spell over them." Now, she obviously said a lot of other stuff, but I just found that really quite chilling and quite telling, because she didn't even know about this love quadrangle at the time, but she's gone, "You've always done this and we know you've been found guilty. Just admit it." Peter, as we said, was pleaded guilty to being an accessory to murder, and he received a suspended sentence, which means he did not have a jail term at all. So a suspended sentence means they give you a certain amount of jail time, but it's suspended. So if you break the law, then you have to do that time. But if not, he's living out in the community, which I know that he was the key prosecution witness, and as they saw it, the only way that Sharon and Greg were, taken to trial and found guilty. But I just don't know how someone can drag a dead body, feed it into a wood chipper and lie about that for months and only receive a suspended sentence. Sharon Graham, earlier this year in 2025, has appealed her conviction and is waiting to hear whether that appeal will be allowed. I doubt it will. And that, Sammy Peterson, is the story of the gruesome, senseless and horrible murder of Bruce James Saunders.